being streamed live on channel 28 and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the district website for replay times. This meeting is also being streamed live on our PPS TV services website. Thank you to everybody for joining in tonight. Welcome to tonight's special meeting. Voters may be asked to consider a 2020 school bond renewal that would maintain the current tax rate and continue investments in our schools. Last week, the PPS Board of Education reviewed the results of the community engagement. We landed on a draft option that most closely resembles the earlier proposed option 3, with adjustments in some key areas, including increased investments in curriculum, seismic improvements, and a category for capacity and enrollment. We approved a bond package that would form a basis for referral to the voters. However, there's a desire to further explore increasing the ADA funding in the proposed 2020 bond option. Tonight, we have an opportunity to consider how much funding will be included in the 2020 bond to support ADA improvements and accessibility. We are also considering some additional funds to the capacity line item to begin the work of addressing the predicted increasing enrollment at Roosevelt High School. After hearing tonight from the staff, we will take a voice vote on what will serve as the basis for the bond referral package we will be voting on next week on the 28th. Superintendent Guerrero, would you like to share your thoughts?
Good evening, Chair. Yes, thank you. And good evening, directors and our listening audience. I think we've been saying this along the journey here. We've always understood that arriving at a final recommended bond package for referral, that this would be an iterative process. So we've, again, appreciated this latest opportunity this past week to continue reflecting on the conversations from the board's last meeting and continue scrutinizing and further refining our estimates and sort of the programmatic objectives to maximize these potential resources supporting our core mission. So earlier today, directors received a staff recommendation based on yet a deeper level of analysis, which includes a few changes to ADA, facility design, some formula adjustments to the way we calculated contingency. So the proposal in front of you for your consideration this evening includes a few things. I just want to call out a little bit more specifically. There was a key question asked in the board's last discussion around the scope and capacity and ability of the organization to embark on some much needed and long overdue ADA accessibility work. And so there's been a description around the kinds of options, and there was some deliberation about do we create a singular pathway where a student could attend elementary, middle, and high and be able to access the building, or should we try to be more aggressive about making sure any school that a student, a family member, a relative, a visitor can actually access as an option at a minimum the main levels of any one of our buildings. And so there has been some further thinking, and there was an initial estimate proposed to the board, but you're going to hear in a little bit greater detail about how we think that if the board would like to add in those additional costs to get at that preferred and more ideal option of main level accessibility. In a previous discussion, the board also, in talking about accessibility of our facilities, also decided to roll into a broader sort of omnibus line item, supporting, making sure that our buildings are not just accessible, but supportive of our special needs students to encourage the inclusive practices we really want to be moving towards as an organization, as a school system, for our students and foreign educators. And so there was some initial description about funds going to a plan that would need to be developed, I would say ideally with some consultation or expertise in universal design, because there's so much overlap here with both modernization and accessibility work. but that we really think about what are the unique equipment and classroom modifications for students with disabilities who attend specific programs, focus classrooms, but how do we also make sure that this other spaces within our school buildings are also accessible and encourage inclusive practices. We also know that we have 82 focus classrooms. They may not stay in the exact same classrooms over time. And so how do we create adaptable, flexible learning spaces that meet the needs of, and not in all cases, disability, but students who need those kinds of classroom modifications. So I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on what we would propose that fund would support. Also, as staff reflected with directors around reflecting on this overall package as we put a final polish on it, is there anything that we've been receiving feedback or input over time that we're not addressing here? And one of those areas that stands out, and commending the advocacy here, is Roosevelt High School. We believe it's important to also integrate and signal to the community that we're serious about making sure we're prepared to add the capacity to match the ed spec that Roosevelt High School yet hasn't realized. And so we're also proposing resources in there to engage in that design and planning with the school community. So that's the second area. And then third, how do we arrive at these additions and not further substantively inflate the overall bond package? And we caught a few areas which actually permits us to add in those areas. So one is removing the program contingency costs that were originally included in curriculum and technology related work. So when you look at the proposed technology scope of work, it already had contingency built into it, but then we counted it again with the overall program contingency. And so we're being more specific now about saying these are facilities related contingency line item because tech already has it built into its budget. Curriculum, on the other hand, will just move forward with a scope of work that stays within that number and won't have a similar contingency. So it'll proceed within its own program budget. So those are a couple of areas I wanted to point out, including that formula recalculation, which initially stated 109.5 million in contingency. That actually dropped to 93.3. That actually conveniently is $16 million, which, if the board directs, speaks for moving from a pathway of accessibility to main level accessibility of work. So those are a few highlights. Certainly we have staff on the line here who can elaborate further if I wasn't clear in any one of these areas or the memos didn't offer enough description, but I think we're getting closer to, we think, a well-balanced package that speaks to many important priority areas. So I'd like to ask our Chief Operating Officer, Dan Young, to walk us through the staff recommendation and this latest draft of the proposed 2020 bond package. Dan?
Thank you, Superintendent, and good evening, directors. Yeah, I think that was a pretty thorough overview as far as comparing the bond option that we looked at last week and what we have before you. You should have a few documents in your possession tonight. One is an update of the option that we are recommending. That's the document that's got the blue table on it. There's also a bond comparison document, and that shows the option that we looked at last week, the direction that was provided during our board meeting last week, and then in blue is the option that we are recommending tonight, and it shows the deltas between those different options. And I believe the superintendent hit on all of those deltas as you walked through his overview. And then the last document you have is a memo on the ADA transition plan, and that nexus to the ADA options that are in the bond. So I want to talk just briefly about the ADA transition plan. It came up a little bit last week, but I thought it might be worthwhile to talk a little bit more about process just to make sure we're all on the same page. The district originally adopted an ADA transition plan back in 1994 and has not updated it since. So we have been in the process of updating the ADA transition plan. Currently, we are soliciting public feedback on 5 potential priority options. When we first began developing potential bond options, we aligned those options with the priorities that were in the draft ADA plan. And at that time, staff thought conventional wisdom was that the priority that might come out of the final plan would be the option that had fully accessible each school configuration in each cluster. As we've continued to develop over the last few months and we've gotten some additional feedback, it appears what current best thinking is that the most likely option would be the one that the superintendent noted about main access to all buildings district-wide. And so the option that is recommended tonight is that main option. But to be clear, the ADA transition plan will be finalized later this year, and staff will recommend that the funding that we have for ADA will align with that transition plan. So effectively what we are doing now is identifying the funding that will support the ultimate ADA transition. So with that, myself and there's other staff here are happy to take questions.
Hi. I don't know if it's echoing. I don't know if it's echoing for others, but Superintendent, I just want to say thank you to you and your team for really digesting the conversation that we had last week and going back to the drawing board a bit to see how we can further refine this package. It's been a fairly quick process, and Dan, your team, thank you so much for all the work you've done in developing new options. I think you heard from the discussion last week that we wanted to revisit the money that's allocated not just for the physical accessibility improvements under the ADA line item, but to also create more flexibility in the funds that we're designating for our special education our special education students, and make sure that that's really aligned with our social justice framework, and really in service to what the superintendent was talking about before in terms of our inclusive vision for education. So I really commend you and your team for going back and figuring out a way that we can come up with a package that it speaks to those values. So thank you very much for that.
So I want to just give us all a chance to share some initial responses, just like Director Constam did. And I thought maybe we could just go kind of through the list alphabetically, and after Constam comes Lowry. So I think one thing I just wanted to say is I appreciate the inclusion of Roosevelt because I know that's been a conversation we've been having as well, and that with, I think all of us feel like if we could just keep adding more money to the bond, we would, because there are so many things we know are needed in our district, but we have to be responsible. And so I think the weighing of all of this has been really helpful, and that we can continue to have these conversations. So Rita is next. Director Moore, do you have any initial thoughts? Rita, you're still muted. It seems like you're having some technical issues. So we'll go ahead and move on to Director Scott.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. No, I really appreciate staff's work over this last week, sort of refining this a little bit. And maybe I have a couple of questions, and maybe these are for staff. I know we also have some community stakeholders who have joined us as well. I've spent some time over this last week trying to get a little bit more up to speed on some of these issues. And one of the things that was interesting in our conversation last week was this policy decision that as a district we need to make. And ultimately, I think we're all in agreement that we want all of our schools, 100% of our schools, to be fully accessible to 100% of our students. So I mean, that is where we're headed, but recognizing it will take a very long time to get there. But the idea of whether it's sort of better to make one school fully accessible in each sort of level at each cluster, or to make the main level accessible, again, with some other things as well, but at each one of our schools, to me was an interesting and complex policy question. And again, as someone who hasn't sort of delved into this, and I haven't heard from the community on this, I'm curious from staff's perspective, and then also if we have community stakeholders who might want to weigh in on this issue in terms of those approaches, because I can make an argument that certainly having kids be able to go to their neighborhood school is great, but I also find it a little troubling going to the neighborhood school, but only kind of halfway, right? And having halfway access, but not at full access, versus having complete access to an entire school. On the other hand, complete access to an entire school that is not their neighborhood school might not be the best option either. And so again, you could make an argument on both sides of these, and I'd really like to hear from others in terms of the right approach moving forward.
So we'll let each of the directors speak and come back. I just want to be clear, I started the alphabet with K, and I'll come back around to Bailey and DePass and Brim. So because Amy started, I thought we'd just continue on from where we were. So the next one is Student Representative Shu. Do you have any initial thoughts to share with us tonight? And Nathaniel, I can't hear you. It looks like you're unmuted. I still can't hear Nathaniel. Roseanne, maybe if you could send out the phone numbers to both Nathaniel and Director Moore so that they could call in. All right, so we're swinging back up to the top of the alphabet while we work out those technical issues. Director Bailey, did you have any thoughts? Welcome to WebEx. Director Bailey, are you out there somewhere in internet land? Wow, this is a super fun first meeting for me.
Haley, I promise we're not hazing you, although it might feel like it right now.
It's totally fine. So I'm going to check that and figure out what's going on, and then we're going to move to Director Brim Edwards.
I'm not sure. Good evening, everybody. I'm not sure we're going to do this because before I have some thoughts, but I'd actually like to ask some questions first. So I'm happy to finish going through the alphabet of people giving their initial thoughts, because I have some questions, and then when we get to the motion, I'll share my thoughts.
Why don't you go ahead and ask if you wouldn't mind, Director Brim Edwards, asking your questions, and then when we get finished going through all of us, staff can respond to them.
So there may be some follow-ups, because some of them are just. Can I just have them answered real time?
Yeah, well, if that's what you want to do, we'll go ahead and we'll move on to Michelle, Director.
That's fine. That's fine.
Great.
So yeah, my initial thoughts are, I remember when the ADA was passed. I think it was in 1987 or 1988 when I was in design school, and have learned more about it since. I am, of course, fully supportive of making all of our buildings accessible, not just because I think that all public buildings should be accessible, but because we have members of the disability community that are that will benefit from our investments. I think it's I mean, that is, Andrew, Director Scott talked about this policy decision, and it's not as easy as it seems what we're weighing, but I mean, just philosophically, I'm fully in support of putting the investments in all of our buildings. I'll be happy to see an updated the plan that was developed in 1994. And I'd like to see an update of that when it comes out, when staff is able to get to that. Thank you.
That's a great point, Director DePass, that we want to see that as a board. So Director Bailey texted me and said that his question was about ADA single floor accessibility challenges at middle schools. Director Bailey, are you there at all? So he's listening to us, but he cannot hear. He cannot speak. And then Director Moore, are you able to speak?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So overall, I think this is an extremely good package. I think it's well balanced. I think it is pretty remarkably responsive to a lot of the highest needs that have been identified, the immediate needs that we really need to address urgently in a lot of cases. I'm glad to see that we're investing in curriculum. I think that's going to make a big difference to students in every school. So some of the other investments that we're going to be making will not touch every school, but the curriculum will. And I think it's a long overdue investment, and it will enable the district finally to get back in sync with the state's materials adoption schedule, and also for the district to develop its some of the special curricula that have been identified. So especially the culturally responsive curricula and the climate justice curriculum. So I'm glad we were able to do that. I'm glad, a little surprised and glad that we've been able to expand the ADA investment so that it will potentially cover the entire district for this level of kind of basic accessibility. I'm glad that we're making investments in upping our game in seismic resiliency, and I hope we can continue to do that moving forward. And I'm grateful that we are going to be investing in planning and design work for Roosevelt's expansion because expectation is, at least in this community, that enrollment will continue to grow at Roosevelt, and we're going to need the additional space within 3 or 5 years, depending on how enrollment growth goes. So we're now signaling to the Roosevelt community that the expansion will happen, and that will enable Roosevelt High School to be to have a student capacity that matches the capacity of every other high school in the city, in the district. So thank you for that. And I'm very much looking forward to the process, the public process that's going to be developing a vision for the Center for Black Student Excellence. It's a very exciting opportunity that I think could be a real game changer for African American students, for that part of the city, and for the district in meeting its equity goals. So I am overall very impressed with the package that we've managed to develop. Thanks.
Student Representative Hsu, are you able to share your thoughts with us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
But yes. Okay, great. Yeah, so I share many of the thoughts of Director Moore. I am glad that Roosevelt has been included, that we can begin to work toward a yeah, sorry. Give me a second. I lost the.
A
There,
full
okay.
1,700 student high school.
What?
A full 1,700 student comprehensive high school, just like everybody else.
Yes, that's the one. No, I'm sorry. I was looking for a file I lost. Yes. Also, I think that the addition of the ADA increase in funds would be good. As to the question of whether it is better to have a full one school per cluster with full accessibility or ground level, or ground level at each school, I think that that's, I don't know, really a question that ought to be asked to the community especially and the students. And I'm just wondering if we have any engagement stats on that. That's just open-ended question, I guess. What does it look like if they exist? And
All right, thank you, Student Representative Shu. What we're going to do now is we are going to make a motion to consider this recommendation, this proposed bond package that's before us. Once that has been moved and seconded, we'll hear from public comment. I know we have a lot of folks that are engaged in the community that can maybe answer some of those questions we had. And then before we vote, we'll have another opportunity as board members to come and ask some of those questions like Director Reports. So I need a motion to approve this bond package.
So
Was that Julia?
it was.
Oops, and who seconds?
Constam?
All right, Director Constam seconds. Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment tonight?
Yes, we have Angela Jarvis Holland.
Welcome. We're glad you're here tonight to be able to give some testimony. And normally we allot 3 minutes, but as is our practice, we allow you the time to finish your thought there. So thank you for being here and for speaking to this. Angela, are you here?
I am, yes.
Okay, we're ready whenever you are.
Have you unmuted me?
I did, yeah.
Okay, so I was saying this is an incredibly complex time that we're in, and the conversations the board's addressing are pretty complex. But they're also, for my activist self, I think they're pretty exciting conversations. And I think we're glad of the city that we live in, and that we're thinking about equity in a really deep intersectional way in these conversations. I wanted to say that sometimes what can be frustrating for our community is there are laws like ADA and IDEA, which is the individuals with, it's around education of people and least restrictive environments. And we ask you to opine on things that sometimes are already laws that have had an incredible amount of input, thought, and subtlety. And I think I would say that sometimes I'm going to ask people to not fall back on the let's get a whole lot more public input for civil rights and human rights and equity issues that are 30 years overdue. Hearing that it's, I mean, I don't need to hear that it was 1994. I've been doing the same advocacy for about 14 years now, and I sent a PowerPoint to a couple of people. The issues still need addressing. And the intersection with race is really interesting to me too. So to answer some of the things that were brought forward, I would say that we, in our minds, because we're not brought up with people with disabilities, we think about being kind and putting really nice things in nice classrooms for those people. Those people belong in all of our schools, all of our classrooms. And if you had access to a first floor and you had accessible software, and we finally have curriculum, which also can be accessible and differentiated, then many of the issues about why we need to go to a special place are already addressed. There are incredible skills in special ed, but they don't have to live in a room. They can come and greet and meet and be with people and do their work and inspire Gen Ed. So I'm saying to you that you don't need to think that just having access on one floor means that people can't have access to things that they need to be successful. Research shows that being with typical peers and being in their community is really one of the most powerful things we can do for folks. Some time ago, Maria was going to be on this call, but her daughter had a surgery. She had addressed the board, and there'd been advocacy from a parent whose son has autism and had been at a school that did not respond culturally at all to their child, and their child had been bullied. They chose their local school where 2 siblings went, where people spoke Spanish, where they could volunteer, and that child is now thriving. It's easy for somebody else without a child with a disability to tell us that 1 in 4 schools is great. We just want the same rights. And I think that that's what Guadalupe, I really appreciated your words tonight. It was very encouraging to me. I think that IDEA and ADA, it would be good for the board members to know a little more about those, because until I had Daniel in my life and did the work I do, which I represent 5,000 families, I didn't really understand some of these issues. And hearing that we're going to be thinking about universal design, thinking about improving technology, there's so much portable support for inclusion, and race and social justice are totally intertwined. We have many children of color that are put into more restrictive placements, and this will be a way that we're addressing equity for them and improving outcomes. We shouldn't have to put our civil rights out for public input or a popularity vote. We need an action step. We need to know that in 4 years, these classrooms will be accessible, because you've broken the faith with our community about 7 different times since I've been involved, and we're ready for real change. But we're also not claiming it for one group. I want to show you my visual aid because I like visual aids. So I don't know if you can see this. That's my son, Daniel, and the young man with him moved. He came from Eastern Europe and didn't speak English. He bonded by sharing the computer and the software that Daniel had to allow him to do work. And the quote says, "We cannot seek achievement for ourselves. Our ambitions must be broad enough to include the aspirations and needs of others for their sake and for our own," Cesar Chavez. I stand with Black Lives Matters, I stand with the initiatives around race, and I stand for human dignity. And I believe that's what this board stands for. And it's definitely what I understand Guadalupe to stand for. So we're ready to get behind this if we hear those assurances. We need to not have a long drawn out process while you decide whether you're going to approve our civil rights. We just need to move now and move quickly. And then I'll be all over being an ambassador for this bond, because we need it. We need it desperately.
Thank you very much for your
Director
testimony.
Lowry, this is Director DePass. I wanted to thank Ms. Jarvis Holland for her testimony. It was moving and it's truthful. I wanted to remind us that the disability community intersects with other isms, with
Absolutely.
LGBTQ and with race in a way that we see, out in the community at large. And also wanted to encourage us to engage with the members that served the city of Portland on the Disability Commission that was convened by the Office of Equity and Human Rights. These are strong activists that have intersecting identities and would be a strong voice for helping us guide this work and inform this work.
Thank you, Director DePass. And I know that you spoke with several of those folks this week. So I think we now have a time to discuss the motion that is before us. And I know, Director Brim-Edwards, that you had some questions that you wanted to ask of staff.
I did.
So let's start there.
Thank you. And I'm not sure who from the staff, but I just want to clarify that the total ADA number for improvements to have our district fully accessible is about 100 million.
That is correct. I think it's a little over 100 million, yes.
Great. And then I just had a question about the ADA transition plan process, because this was a much debated topic prior to the referral of the 2017 bond. So just so that now that we're in a, thank goodness, a regular pattern of approving bonds, sort of what the cycle is. And I'm assuming that 1994 plan was planned in anticipation of the 1995 bond. I know you weren't there at the time.
I don't know that offhand.
I'm assuming, given the timing, that that plan laid some of the groundwork. I know there were a lot of investments in 95. And then just a clarification. So we had one pass 94 before the 95 bond, and then we didn't have another bond until 2012. And we had a 2012 and then 2017. Is it that the plan from 94 was had a durability that we didn't do it, or it wasn't required by law? I'm just thinking as we get into this cycle of bonds and improvements, and when I look at the 100 million, I actually did, and considering we're going to do a $1.2 billion bond, it's actually not that much. So I'm interested in the iteration of, is the normal cycle we do it to plan for the bond, or is there a legal requirement, or share your thinking? Is that it would be great that we next bond cycle get, sounds like we're going to be catching up this one, but for the next one that it really would inform the work at the start.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll have to double check as far as once we adopt the update if there's going to be another legal trigger at some point in time. I think the overall intention here is that the ADA transition plan, when we adopt it later this year, will dovetail with our long-range facilities plan, which was adopted in 2012, and that's required to be updated every 10 years. We're starting that process. We've already started that process, and we look to have that completed in 2021. And then when we're looking for these sequence of bonds, those are two documents that I think that we will look at for guidance. But also we will look at when we're bond planning is if they're still current. And if they're not still current on what the best thinking is, then we would need to update them, particularly the ADA transition plan or other capital planning documents.
And then just one last follow-up. So based on the proposal tonight, which is about 33 million, if 100 million is the size of roughly the district to get all of our buildings in the district accessible, in theory we'd have about $65 million in $65 million in funds and improvements to finish making all our buildings accessible. And I know that doesn't count for curriculum and a lot of other things that are also needed, but that would, is that the right?
Yes, I think that's
generally?
Yeah, based upon our current estimates and looking out that far, they're definitely estimates. They'll definitely change. But yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. And also worthwhile to note, the ADA transition plan doesn't just note what that current increment is or what those current priorities are, but really it's to show the full transition from where we are to full compliance district-wide. But the way you're thinking is logical.
So just two last questions. Was one of the options of the ADA transition plan community meetings full accessibility?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that very well. Can you repeat that?
Of the options, so it's been presented that one of the options was, one building or one school at each level per cluster would be accessible. Another was the main floors. I was wondering if one of the options was we're going to fully complete all the accessibility.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'll let John Lyons, our senior program managers on here, correct me if I say anything inaccurate. The overall plan is to move the district to full compliance district-wide. There's 5 priority options that are in the draft plan, and those are the ones that we are receiving feedback on in the community engagement right now. And what those are meant to show is where do we start? Not where we finish, but where do we start? So what is that first increment? And what are those first priorities? Certainly there's more detail once that's identified. Here's what our first priorities are. More detail being specifically what schools are those, what is the sequence? But there's always that question of where do you prioritize your first work and your early work?
Great. And then just thank you very much. I think that's really helpful, especially as we think going forward, completing the plan, because I think this is a pretty good down payment, but more needs to be done. So just to clarify, the change from the other night to what's being proposed is the 16 million would ensure that every school building's main floor would be accessible within the 4 years of the bond.
Yeah, good question. You're right on the scope. The scope is main floor accessibility district-wide, and certainly there's some nuance to that. Our schools that have very small first floors and instantly have stairs, those will need to have some special attention. And right now, based for budgeting purposes, we assumed 5 years. We definitely need to spend some more time digging into that, but that's the schedule that we've used to estimate our management costs.
Okay, at 5 years, 16 million should the asterisk of we have lots of different buildings.
Yeah, that's our best thinking now.
Great, thank you. Appreciate you answering my question.
Yeah, no
information.
Chair Lowry, with your permission, there was an outstanding question by Director Bailey on the same topic of ADA. And since we have Mr. John Lyons here, maybe we can hear a word from him. We certainly enjoyed hearing from him late the other evening. But if he could clarify this question of main level accessibility is a big leap forward and long overdue. But in the middle grades or in a comprehensive middle school, what are some factors that we're going to need to think about moving forward? And I know that they're described in the document, but I think for the public's benefit, it would be important to hear Mr. Lyons describe it. John?
Mr. Lyons, you're still muted. Kara, it looks like he's still muted. Is there a way to unmute him?
Every time I hit unmute, somebody remutes themselves. Okay. Yes, I'm hitting unmute. And it doesn't seem to be working.
Oh, you're still muted. Can you try to unmute yourself again, John?
Maybe while we're waiting, I have a question about the first floor accessibility.
Great.
So we talked about entrances. What about, does that accessibility include restrooms, other common areas that would be on the first floor? What would the scope of work be for accessibility on a first floor besides exits and entrances?
Hi, this is Dan. I'll speak for John. John's definitely the expert, but short version of it is yes, it's really making everything on the first floor accessible. So the only barrier at that point, so that's from outside into the building, making all spaces, virtually all spaces, there might be some exceptions, accessible. And then the barriers really are, once this phase is completed, is the multi-stories.
I know that Director Constant had a question, and I saw Director Scott unmute and lean forward, which I'm taking to be body language for he had a question. So let's take Director Constant first, and then Director Scott.
I just wanted to quickly go back to the conversation about how much work do we have left to fulfill our promise as far as full accessibility, and just a plug for the fact that just like with our seismic work and with all of our health and safety work, the best way to get there is full modernization of our buildings. So to think that, we'll have our high school portfolio completely accessible for all of our students, and then just as quickly as we can get to the rest of the buildings in our portfolio for modernization, that reduces our need for retrofits specifically in service to accessibility.
Director Scott, do you have a comment?
Just really a quick comment. I wanted to thank Ms. Jarvis Holland for her testimony tonight. This is exactly what I needed to hear in terms of the right approach forward. And it's frustrating for me we weren't able to get that earlier. And so my apologies to you, as the chair of the bond committee, that we weren't able to incorporate that into our planning process. And because it came up late, we are scrambling a little bit. It does sound like this is the right approach forward. And the ADA was adopted in 1990 when I was a Portland Public Schools student. And it is frustrating for me that so many boards and so much time, in the 90s and early 2000s and later, have failed to take action. So I'm glad that we're able to include something. And I think what staff have brought forward is a good plan. And I really appreciate your testimony tonight, letting us know that this is the right approach. And I'm going to concur with other board members who have talked about the down payment, right? And looking forward, one of the things we've talked about for a decade now is completing the high schools. I like Chair Constamp's point she just made about modernizations, bring things up to code in a really comprehensive way. But we need to look to this bond, this one that we're adopting, and then the one 4 years from now, and sort of say, okay, what's going to be that next step that we're going to take? And I really look forward to working with you and others in the community to figure out what that's going to be. So thank you for being here tonight. Sorry, and Chair Lowry, did I say Chair Constam? Boy, it's a yes. Anyway, it's a tough transition.
Amy did such a great job steering us for so long. I can see why that happened. Student Representative Shu, do you have any further questions that you wanted to add in?
Yeah, I just had a follow-up on Director Constam's point about modernization. About the high schools, is it the high schools that are considered to have been modernized all fully accessible, including like elevators? And what is the status in the other two high schools that have not been and are not on this current package, specifically Wilson and Cleveland?
So I saw John vigorously shaking his head yes to the question about those high schools that have been redone are fully accessible. Is that correct, John?
That is 100% correct.
I
assume you can hear me then. That's great. Then regarding the other two high schools, Wilson and Cleveland, I will call them largely accessible. They do have some improvements necessary. Wilson, if I remember correctly, is about $300,000. Cleveland is about $400,000, but both have elevators, both have all levels accessible, both have accessible restrooms at all levels.
John, since we got you on the line, could you speak to the specifics around Director Bailey's question of our middle schoolers and what main level accessibility might mean in the way of programmatic access in a building?
Absolutely. So just to frame the issue a little bit more concretely, we have about 30 schools where we have multi-level instructional programming and no elevator. So those are really our problem areas. Looking at just the middle schools within that set, it's about 4 schools. And I share the concern that those are going to be the most problematic to adjust programming to accommodate main level accessibility. So what I'm going to do is reach out to administrators at these schools and invite them to the forthcoming ADA transition plan community meetings to get their thoughts on what administratively that would mean for them. How complicated would it be to program an entire 8th grade curriculum on the main level?
Director Bailey has let me know that he can hear us. Director Bailey, if you could text me and let me know if that satisfied your question or if you have any follow-up, that'd be great. Is there any other comment or questions from the board?
Chair Lowry, I have a couple of other comments and brass tacks. Dan, are you able to put the revised option up on the screen easily?
Let me see or ask Kara or Roseanne, are you able to present?
It's not essential, but I wanted to just revisit a conversation that we had last week, where I believe I was the source of something that I'm going to identify now as an error, or at least a misstep. So we combined the line items for accessibility investment and also what had been previously earmarked as the focus classrooms. And what we agreed upon was to characterize that line item for the focus classrooms. Yay, thank you very much. As being more flexible in service to special education investments. And I'd like the board to consider actually disaggregating those two line items again, because I think it's important as a point of accountability as we track the bond and we track the bond spending, to see those categories as different. So I definitely would like to strike the word classrooms, because we want to move away from that notion of segregated classrooms and focus more on special education investments in service to integration and inclusiveness for all of our school communities. And so those numbers, I believe, are 32 million for accessibility and 15.2 for the investments in special education services. And I think it would behoove us to track those separately. And we can, I want to elicit some board discussion on that. And then, you know, just the other point I wanted to say in terms of the superintendent leading things off with a little more detail around his vision for inclusive education is that we actually see that embedded in a couple of other items here and line items here. So for example, our curriculum, which includes, you know, thinking holistically about our MTSS strategies, our curriculum includes, I think, some thoughtful deliberation by staff about how to serve all students. So that doesn't exclude our special education students and what they need. And likewise for technology, I know that there is an allocation within that technology budget within the, I think it's $5.8 million for pre-K2 and assisted that provides for assistive technology. So that's embedded in those technology numbers. So I just kind of wanted to bring the conversation back full circle and say that just because we're talking about these particular investments for our special education students, it doesn't mean that we're not also considering the needs of those students in the other ways that we're looking at the other items in this bond. So again, just interested in what people think about disaggregating those two items, and I feel pretty strongly about striking the word classroom from that line item 3.
So Director Constam, what I'm understanding you to say is that, you know, you advocated last week for the sort of these being brought together, and that was sort of an error, and you want to take them apart again, but change it to special education investments and then have ADA separate. So then putting ADA back under health and safety, and then education improvements would have the special education investments. Is that correct?
Yes, and that realization came through a lot of conversations that I had this week with the community about just accountability on our spending in these areas, and I came to see their point of view.
I think, you know, one of the things I know about you is that you're very responsive to the community and you're always trying to listen and improve. And I know that you came from a place of trying to serve the community, and now you've learned more, so we improve. So I think because we've moved this to be under consideration, this draft, I think what needs to happen is that you need to make an amendment to change that to special education investments and then move the ADA accessibility as a separate line item, and then we can move and second that and then discuss it. So would you like to make a motion to that effect?
I would. So moved as Director Lowry just discussed. And I believe, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that the dollar figures attached there are 32 million for the ADA accessibility and 15.2 for special education investments.
They're close. They're a little off from that. The special ed is 13.4 and the ADA is 33.8. Those numbers you can see on the other document, which is the bond options comparison.
Got it.
Same sum.
Please correct my motion.
Yeah, so the motion is that 33.8 to ADA and 13.4 to the special education investments. Do we have a second for Director Constam's motion?
Second it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director DePass. Is there any, Michelle, is it DePass or DePass? I hear people say it differently, and I need to ask you.
You know, that's funny. People probably say it wrong all the time. I'm so used to it. It's DePass.
DePass.
Or if you want to be culturally appropriate, it's DePass.
DePass. Okay, we can do DePass. So Director DePass seconded, and then is there any discussion on this amendment?
This is Rita. I'm a little uncomfortable making a whole series of last-minute changes. I think since we're not changing the actual amounts of money that are involved here, and reverting back to the previous iteration of this, I think it's okay. It does make me a little uncomfortable that we're kind of questioning staff expertise from the dais, but I'm okay with going back to the original version of this with the amendments as made.
It's the original staff expertise is one way to think about it.
Any other comments before we vote on the amendment? All right, the amendment before us is to Chair Constam, Director Constam's amendment is before us. All in favor, please vote by saying yes.
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 All opposed, please vote by saying no. Any abstentions? Student Representative Shu, how do you vote?
Yes.
All right, Scott Bailey texted me yes. I don't know if you can see that. I don't know if that counts, Liz, if he texts me. So Liz, can you let us know if a text vote is?
The motion passes. And
the motion passes 6-0.
He can hear us and he has registered his vote. I'm comfortable with that.
Yes, okay, so the motion passes with 8-0. All right, is there any further?
Technically 7-0.
Okay.
With the student representative
voting yes. All right, thank you, Liz, for that clarification and correction. Is there any further discussion on the main motion of passing this revised bond renewal?
I have some.
To be clear, we're not referring it yet. We're going to refer it on the 28th.
I have some comments I'd like to make.
Great.
So not that I wanted to spend my free Tuesday in another board meeting, but I'm going to say I'm really glad that we had tonight's meeting because I think we are going to move this meeting with a much stronger package that we're going to take to the voters that includes all of our students. And I want to thank the school improvement chair, Andrew Scott, and all the staff who spent lots of time moving the package to the place where we were last Tuesday night. I think we had a really strong foundation. I was disappointed that the additional funds for the ADA accessibility weren't added at the last board meeting. But the beauty of an iterative process and flexibility and nimbleness is that we can continue to refine and perfect. And I think that's what we're doing here tonight. I know we didn't have a lot of time at the beginning of the night. It was late when the issue got brought up. So I was disappointed, but I'm appreciative that staff went back and built out a proposal that does include a greater degree of access at all of our schools. And I also want to just especially thank Angela Jarvis Holland and other parents who, after the meeting was over, said, not enough. We want to be with you, but it's not enough. And, I think sometimes, we have invested a lot of time in something and we're so close. And I think tonight's action is just going to get us a little bit closer to a really strong package that we all will feel proud of taking to voters. I want to recognize that this is a substantial investment, but when I look at the overall number, 66 million that remains, I think about, that's in the overall scope of things, not that much money. So I hope we keep pressing forward. When I was thinking at the end of last week that we were going to be heading to next week to vote on the final package, it seemed
Power's
like
out.
Yeah.
Did we lose Amy? Okay. I say after the board meeting, I felt like we were just missing this one piece that really would have sort of filled a gap in our being able to make the case, because there are so many things in this bond that I do think make the case that this is a commitment and a major investment in our racial equity and social justice priorities. And I think tonight's recommendation gets us one step closer to having something that we can take to the community that really reflects, I think, our priorities, our values, and how we want to set this district up, at least the physical plant, the district up to better serve all of our students. So I want to thank the staff and the board members for willing to come back on on a Tuesday night and consider this, because I think we've got a great package to take to our community and also to better serve our students.
Any other discussion before we move to a vote?
This is Director Constam. I'm sorry about that. If you were looking for me, not just my Wi-Fi went out, but all my power went out. So I'm sorry I didn't have an opportunity to vote on that amendment, but thank you everybody for your support. I understand. And I just want to echo what Julia said, that I feel like this package really represents sort of the whole process we've been through over the last year in terms of defining our values as a district around equity and social justice. And that feels really good to have the investments in Jefferson, to have the investments in the Center for Black Student Excellence and all of the improvements that will mean for the schools in that cluster. And then to have a good down payment on making progress for our students with special needs I want to commend the leadership team of the district because I think this is all very directly related to the process that we've been through around building our board goals and building our vision as a district, what we want to see for our graduates, and building our strategic plan. So this bond package feels to me a very positive reflection of the mission that we've stated and the opportunity that we've had to really express our values as a district.
All right, it looks like we are ready to vote. So we're going to do a voice vote, and we will go in alphabetical order. We will start with Director Bailey, who has texted me yes. Director Brim Edwards?
Yes.
Director DePass?
Yes.
Director Constam?
Yes.
Director Lowry? Yes. Director Moore?
Yes.
Director Scott?
Yes.
And Student Representative Shu?
Yes.
All right, it passes 7-0 with Student Representative Shu voting yes. I do think we might need to amend the vote from the amendment, Liz. I'm not sure since Amy didn't get a chance to vote, but she did later indicate that she would have voted yes. So I'll leave that up to you and Kara on the minutes.
We'll sort it out.
I would love an opportunity to belatedly vote yes.
I think we can accommodate that.
Excellent. All right, well, despite a little bit of a bumpy start with some of our technology and connectivity issues, we have managed to make it through. So Superintendent Guerrero, will you please prepare a resolution and filing paperwork to refer this bond package in the proper format for the July 28th board meeting?
Chair Lowry, administration would be very pleased to draft a resolution that reflects the intent and the spirit of this conversation. We'll make sure to polish up the language that it reflects tonight's discussion, but as directors have already stated, I think the prospect of what we're proposing hits on so many areas that our community and our students well deserve. So thank you for getting it to this point. I'm having a deja vu to the SIA investment package, feeling like that was well-rounded. I feel similarly here. So thank you for all the hard work and discussion that has gone into getting it to this point. Thank you.
All right, and with that, our meeting is adjourned 48 minutes early. I don't know that we can make that every time that we have a meeting together with me as chair, but let's try. As long as we're able to do such good and efficient work as we have done tonight. So thank you everybody for your time. This meeting is now adjourned, and our next meeting of the board will be held July 28th. Thank you.
Like a boss.